Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things we want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, let's remove our center hubcap and then remove all 4 of our 21mm lug nuts. Now that we have that out of the way, the next thing that we want to do is push in our caliper piston here. To do that, it's going to be easiest using this bar. I'm just going to carefully get in between this area, and then I'm going to gently start prying. Come up in here, do the same thing. There we are. Now once you have your caliper pushed back, the next thing we want to do is start removing our caliper slider bolts. There's one on the lower aspect and one a little bit higher up. Go ahead and remove the pair. Remove the caliper from the bracket, and you're going to want to make sure that you inspect the caliper. If you see any fluid coming around this area here, that's brake fluid, and that means your caliper needs to be replaced. This one looks good, and it pushed back fine, so I'll go ahead and hang it, putting no pressure on our flex hose. Now we're going to start removing the pads from the brackets. It's very common for them to be stuck in there. I'm just going to go ahead and use my pry bar here. There's one. Remove the other one. Next, we're going to use a 19mm socket to remove both of our caliper bracket bolts. There's that one. I'm just going to start it back in there, just a few threads to hold this bracket for me so I can continue on to the upper one. Remove your bracket, set it aside. Now let's go ahead and use one of our lug nuts. I'm just going to start it onto the stud right here, and the next thing we're going to do is remove the rotor from the bearing. Remove the rotor, set it aside. Now we're going to move along to cleaning up the mating surface of the hub where the brand new rotor is going to sit. Now once we have the main area cleaned down, let's get in between the lug studs with this brush. Copper never sees. Now it's going to be time to prepare the braking surfaces on our brand new rotor. Let's go ahead and use some parts cleaner. Nice clean rag, we'll wipe it down and then do the same to the other side. Now we can put it up here on the vehicle. We'll go ahead and grab onto one of our lug nuts, put it on there so it's nice and tight, and it's going to hold the rotor from moving around on us while we continue working. All right, now it's going to be time to get ready to clean up our caliper bracket. So what we're going to want to do is go ahead and grab onto our caliper sliders. That's these right here. Just go ahead and give them a little twist, and we're going to start removing them. Try to grab that boot so it comes up and off of there as well. Sometimes they can be stuck on there. If that's the case, just use a small screwdriver. We'll gently pry it off, being very careful not to damage the boot here. Slide that off, and now we can remove the boot from the slider itself. We'll rest it down in the position where it originally came from. Do the same to the other one. Pop that down. As you can see, there was a lot of rust in here. That essentially tells me that there was moisture making its way in there, which overall is very bad. Let's continue on to these caliper bracket tins right here. Just going to gently pry these off. Set these aside for recycling. And now we can start cleaning up our caliper bracket. The areas that you want to pay special attention to are all the areas that you saw those tins on, so along these areas, both sides of the bracket, and of course inside the slider ports. That's also super important. To do the slider ports, I'm just going to go ahead and put some parts cleaner right inside there. Now we'll use a bore brush. We'll get right inside there, just try to clean out any of the existing debris or gunk that might be inside. That one looks good. I'll move along to the next one. Give them a quick squirt. Now we'll let those dry. As they're drying, let's continue on to these areas here. Now these can typically be cleaned off if you had like a small screwdriver or something. You could try to scrape off any of the large chunks that are on it, but overall you want to try to use something that can sand it down and remove as much debris as possible. Alright, now as you can tell, this side of the bracket looks perfect. We're going to continue on and do the same on this side. Okay, now once you're sure both sides look good, let's continue on. The next areas on the bracket that we want to pay attention to is right along this area right here. Now that's where that caliper slider boot's going to be. As you saw, we had a lot of corrosion and rust inside there, and that's commonly because of this area right here. If there's any buildup, it's going to make it so the boot isn't adhering to this properly and moisture can make its way in. We'll just go ahead and scrape it out of the way, clean it up, and do the same to the other one. Let's give this one more spray down. And now we can set this aside and move along to our caliper slider pins. Let's go ahead and wipe down our caliper slider pin here. And now we can have a quick look at it. On this one right here, you can tell that it has this rubber boot across it. What you want to do is just check it. Make sure it's not swollen and it doesn't feel like it wants to slide off of there. If it does, then that means that there was something contaminated in there and it swelled up. This one looks good enough. So let's also pay attention to the shaft area, make sure that's in good condition. And the last thing you want to do is make your way all the way up into this groove area right there. This is super important, just like on the caliper bracket. You want to make sure you clean this out. Any of this debris that you can see inside there could make a possibility for moisture to make its way in and seize this up. We'll go ahead and clean it up. Alright, now at this point, this one looks pretty good overall, so we're going to continue on and do the same to this one. Alright, this one looks decent enough. Let's get back over to the vehicle. Okay, so now at this point we have the bracket cleaned up and we have both of our slider pins cleaned up. The next thing we want to do is clean up the slider boots. We're just going to go ahead and use a rag. We'll give it a couple twists here and then just go ahead and push it right on through. Once it's through, let's just go ahead and start spreading that boot a little bit and then just rub it all along the rag that's along the inside there. The next thing you want to do is have a look inside. Make sure you don't have any large chunks of anything inside there, and you also want to just give it a couple squishes and just make sure that it's nice and soft and pliable and it's not torn or worn in any way. Once you're sure it looks good, go ahead and do the same to the other one. Now we're going to start adding some lubricant to the situation. The areas that we want to go is just along this hole right here. I always put just a tiny bit right on the inside there, and then I always make sure that I put a little bit right along that outer edge, the area that we cleaned up, and I was telling you want to make sure that you have it clean so no moisture makes its way in. By applying a little bit of grease along this area, it's going to help a lot. After you do that, let's continue on with the slider pin. You want to make sure that you coat the entire shaft of the pin. This is super important. And then, of course, make sure that you get up into the groove right up along here, same as the bracket. Keep the moisture out of there. Now we can go ahead and take our caliper slider boot. Just going to slide this right up and on there. Work it around a little bit. Make sure we're working in that grease. Make sure there's still plenty of lubricant on the slider. If there isn't, just apply a little bit more. Let's go ahead and slide this right in here. Now when we press it, we want to be trying to press the boot up and onto that ridge right there. So I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze it. I'll stick my fingers along here. I'm just going to work it all the way around. There we are. Once you think you have it on there, just give it a couple stretches. If the boot pops off, you need to make sure that it's completely secured. This one looks good. We'll give it a couple more spins to work in that grease. Do the same to the other one. Now that we have the sliders done, let's continue on with that high temperature grease, and we're just going to apply a thin layer along all the areas of the bracket that we went ahead and we cleaned up. Essentially the areas where those tins are going to be, and this is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now it's going to be time to install our tins on this. To be able to do this, it's going to be best if you just go ahead and take the bracket and you put it over by the vehicle itself. Now the reason why the two tins for each side look a little bit different, one of them is going to have this on it for each side, is because on the pads themselves, they're going to want to be able to separate up along the top area. That's what these tabs are for. So just go ahead and make sure you have the tin in the right position. We'll slide this into the bracket. And then you're going to want to reach down inside this area right here and just kind of pinch that in. That's what locks it in so it can't fall off. Lock that down as well. Sometimes you can use some pliers if you feel as though you need to. Now let's go ahead and put the bracket on the vehicle. We can take both of our mounting bolts. I always like to use a little bit of red thread locker. We'll start these in, snug them up, and then we're going to torque these to 122 foot-pounds. Now that the bracket's on, let's continue on back over at the caliper itself. You want to ensure that the piston's pressed in all the way. I'm just going to go ahead and use my caliper depression tool here. Squeeze that right in until it's bottomed out. Take a little bit of that high temperature grease. We're going to just go right along the end of this piston right here, essentially the areas that are going to touch up against the pad. Once again, this is for vibration dampening and noise reduction. Now we'll do along the back side of both of these ears. Now it's time to install our brand new brake pads. You want to try to find a pair that has the two tabs up along the top area like this. Now as we start putting these in, what you want to do is just try to line up this tab right here so it slides into right there. You can see that. Now we'll just put this ear up inside the bracket, right up there. Slide the lower aspect in, just like this. Now what you want to do is just make sure that the pad can move around inside here. If it's frozen inside the bracket, that's due to the fact that maybe you didn't clean this up enough, in which case you're going to want to go ahead and take it back apart so you can clean it a little better. Let's get that inboard pad in there as well. There we are. Go ahead and grab onto that caliper. We'll slide it right over the top of these. Push in on the sliders if you need to. Now it's time to install our caliper slider bolts here. A little bit of red thread locker, couldn't hurt. We'll start them both in, bottom them out, and then we'll torque each of these to 20 foot-pounds. Okay, so now at this point we can go ahead and put our wheel back up on here. Let's start on all of our lug nuts. We'll bottom these out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we're going to torque the lug nuts to 85 foot-pounds. Now that we have the wheels safely on the ground, let's go ahead and torque these in a crisscross manner. After you have all your lug nuts safely torqued, let's go ahead and put on our hubcap. Now for this, you're going to have a valve cover hole. You want to make sure that you line this up with the stem. Give it a couple loving bonks. Make sure it's completely secured so it doesn't fall off while you're driving down the road. Okay friends, we got the brakes back together. What's left to do now? The process is going to be the exact same thing on the other side of the vehicle. After that, you want to make sure that you go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment of the vehicle, pump up that brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Get under the hood into the engine compartment here, come over to your master cylinder, make sure that the brake fluid's filled with .3 brake fluid. After that, take it for a road test. Thanks.